My name is Maddie, and you are watching True Summer Knits. This is episode 14 of my knitting podcast. Today I have a lot of things to talk about, considering it's been like a month and a half since my last episode. I've finished some things, probably not as much as you would expect for a month and a half, because I spent a lot of time working on something that is not going to be finished, but we are going to go through everything off my needles, on my needles, things I've learned this last month and a half, and anything new I have, or whatever else I need to talk about before we go. Let's get started with my finished objects. The first finished object of today is, drumroll please, my tulip loop sweater. Wow, look at that. How beautiful is that, am I right? Woohoo! I'm not wearing it today because I'm warm, and also it's a lot easier to show off like details when I'm not wearing it. Then I'll have to stand up and put my arm in your face or whatever. So I'm going to tell you the basic information about this pattern first. So again, tulip loop sweater by Other Loops. This is an Aran weight pattern. She uses a heavy DK and a lace weight held together. I'll talk more about the yarn choice in a second. The gauge is 18 stitches by 28 rows in this 3x2 rib pattern. It's always hard for me to tell gauge with rib. This one relaxed a lot after blocking, and it was easier to tell what my actual gauge was. Because it's an Other Loops pattern, as we know, it is only available in sizes extra small to double XL, which is not the best, so I don't know, but that's Other Loops, you know what you're getting. And it is a top-down pattern with about 10 inches of positive ease, but I don't feel like it's oversized at all on me. I'd have to measure to see the exact ease I'm getting, but I knit the size extra small, I believe, and my bust measurement is like 33.5 to 34 inches, so there you go. I feel like I have a little less than that. So again, she recommends like a heavy DK yarn. She recommends Issachar Jensen or Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino, which, you know, both heavy DK weight yarns, and she holds it with a strand of silk mohair. So I did not want to do that. I just felt like a heavy DK and a worsted would be very hot, and I liked the sweater design so much. I wanted it to be something that I would like actually wear without it being too hot all the time, although I don't know how well that worked. It's hard to tell until it actually gets cold here. But what I did instead was I found this yarn. It's a DK weight yarn. When I got in, it definitely feel like it's a heavy DK. But I just didn't hold it with mohair. So when I ordered this yarn, I expected that I would have to like do math to figure out either which size to knit, or either do math to just change the numbers and get the size I wanted. But then I did the gauge swatch on 5mm needles. This pattern is meant to be knit on 4.5mm needles. And I did the gauge swatch, and I hit gauge like perfectly. So I just ended up knitting size extra small to get something slightly smaller, and it worked out just fine. I didn't have to do any math, but I'll show you the yarn that I got. This is Cascade BFL. It is 100% Blueface Leicester wool. I'll give you the details on, oh, that's not supposed to happen. Shoot. Not very good at this. I think that's the best we're gonna get. Wow, I'm not reading the label. Okay, I'm gonna be very careful reading this label so I don't do that again. If you have any tips for making a hank not look like this, let me know. That was really hard, much harder than I thought it was going to be. So again, 100% Blueface Leicester wool. This is a DK weight yarn. It comes in 100 grain hanks, or whatever you call this that I've created, and it has 262 yards in a hank. The gauge they recommend on the label is 22 to 24 stitches on 3.75 to 4mm needles. I feel like this is kind of a heavy yarn for that. I mean, obviously it's probably going to be hard to tell, but it's definitely a thicker strand, and it has a lot of like long fibers coming off of it. So I definitely feel like it works up thicker to a DK. I'm sure you could get that gauge, but in my personal opinion. This is in Rose Heather. It's a beautiful color. It's like this beautiful pink mid-tone, like slightly muted color, perfect for a true summer like me. So as soon as I saw this, I was really excited, and I thought it would be really perfect for the tulip loop sweater, because even one of her samples is knit in a color that looks just like this. So I really liked seeing it in that color. I wanted one for myself. And however, the thing is that I do not like this yarn at all. It is uncomfortable to wear. It is just even uncomfortable, really, to hold in my hands. I find it itchy, especially when I get even a little bit hot. It just pokes me. I don't like it, but I don't like rustic yarns. I ordered this because, tell me what you think. I always heard that BFL was soft, or obviously not as soft as merino, but soft. And it definitely softened up a lot after blocking, but it's just not soft even remotely. I've learned that I just need to stick to my merinos or my safe wools. If you have any other safe wools for people who don't really like rustic yarns, please comment them down below. Let me know what yarn brands you've tried that are for people who like soft things. I'm not particularly sensitive to wool, but this just has these long like fibers, and I feel like it's like a more rustic yarn. I've definitely felt way more rustic yarns, like yarns that are extremely unpleasant to even hold in your hands. I wouldn't say this is really that, but it's definitely past my threshold for what I consider comfortable to wear. So that sucks. I still like wearing this. I mean, I can wear it. Like, it's not like I'm constantly aware of it the whole time, but considering how long it takes to make a sweater, I'm going to make sweaters in things that I like from now on. Obviously, I couldn't tell just from holding the hank. I could tell it wasn't the softest in the world, but it didn't feel like it was going to be super rough. I really didn't know until I made it to a place where I could start trying it on, and then I realized it wasn't the most comfortable thing, but, you know, it's beautiful. So there's that. And again, it did soften up a lot after blocking. When I first tried it on, obviously the rib was very compact compared to what it is now. So it was a combination of fitted almost and itchy. I was so scared before blocking this that I was never going to touch it. I thought I was going to hate it. It was a lot tighter, like it was almost fitted. So I was worried I wasn't on gauge or I picked the wrong size, even though I'd done a gauge swatch. And obviously rib relaxes a lot, but blocking, it relaxed a lot. And part of that is from, let's see if you can tell what I had to do here. I don't know why you can see this. I pinned it out, extreme pinned it out, so you can see little triangles or little edges on the side where I pulled it with my pins. I've done that before and it didn't really make a difference, but on this one I guess it held its shape so well that it just has these little triangles from where I pinned it out, and it has it on the arms, but you can't tell as much. I know it'll go away when I block it again, but at first it made me feel like I shouldn't wear it, but when I wear it, unless I've got my arms up like this, it's not like insanely noticeable that I have little triangles coming out of my sides. So that's not the worst thing. Also, I bought a lot of this yarn and I have a lot left over. So for your information, I used 341 grams of the Cascade BFL to make this sweater, and I have about 260 grams of this left. So not enough to make another sweater, really. Maybe it is, or maybe some kind of cardigan. I could probably find one, but I don't like this yarn and I will not be making anything else in this, unfortunately, even though the color is beautiful. I bought more than I needed, again, because for one, I didn't think it was going to take this amount of grams. I thought it would take more. And then I bought extra because I thought I was going to have to be doing math, and I wasn't quite sure how much yarn I would need if I had to do my own math to change all the stitch counts. So it ended up just being the case where I bought a lot more than I needed. So, side note, if you feel like you would like this yarn, or you want to try it, or you have some kind of thing you could make with 2.5 hanks of this yarn, please DM me on Instagram and I will sell it to you for a good price, because I don't want it. I'm definitely sure someone else would love it, but it's not for me, and I don't want these big hanks sitting in my stash when I'm never going to use them. So if nobody buys them, I will just donate them or something. They're nice. It's nice yarn. It's just not for me. So 341 grams comes out to about 900 yards, which is pretty good for a sweater. I thought it was going to be more again. So after this, I'm just going to go back to my soft yarn. Again, please tell me your favorite soft yarns. They don't have to be the softest thing in the world, but just not itchy or rough. Just nice, tame yarns for people like me. The last thing is that I have another sweater quantity of yarn. It's the Brooklyn Tweeds Tone, and it feels kind of similar to this in the ball. I have not knit it up or anything, so I'm not sure, but it makes me scared that I'm not gonna like it, and that was expensive yarn. So I have 9 hanks of that. It's in this bright color, so I feel like I guess I could knit a cardigan in it, and it wouldn't be the worst thing since I would be using it to cover up, but I would still feel it on my arms. I don't really want to spend a lot of time knitting with something that I won't end up liking. So I don't know. Give me your thoughts on that. If you've used the Brooklyn Tweed Tones, did you find it itchy? And if so, should I sell that too? I don't know, because it's also a lot of yarn. So I don't know. I feel like it's a sweater color, So I guess even if I could get away with a cardigan, I don't know if I'd want to make a cardigan in that color. So it's complicated. As for the pattern, I found most of it straightforward. The only problems I had reading this pattern was when I got to the sleeves, and I'm going to try to kind of explain to you why I had some difficulties. So I'm going to need you to visualize with me here. This is your sleeve. Wait. This is your sleeve. This, right in the middle of where the cables are, is where you put a marker. Okay, that was a horrible way of saying that. So right where this seam begins, where you start working the cable, in between the 6 knit stitches on either side, you put a marker. And that's not beginning of the round, that's just the top of armhole marker. And then at the bottom of the sleeve, where you usually do, is your beginning of round marker. So basically, she has you do the setup, and then she has you knit to the beginning of round marker, and then she says to break your yarn and to rejoin your yarn up here, basically. So it's weird, because she says to rejoin your yarn here at the top marker, but she says that you need to slip the 6 knit stitches before you rejoin the yarn, which I find strange, because are you just meant to put the rest of the stitches on hold, then slip 6 stitches and join your yarn at the marker? I mean, when you just be slipping every stitch at that point, it really doesn't make sense. So first of all, I didn't end up even cutting my yarn, I just knit to that point. But another thing, it kind of makes more sense for you to join the yarn before the 6 knit stitches because of the way she does the short rows. So she says, once you join your yarn, knit 12 stitches. 12 stitches would make you like not in pattern if you consider where you join to be at the armhole marker at the top. But if you joined before those 6 stitches, then 12 stitches would make sense because that's how many stitches are in the cable. But then why would you be slipping the 6 stitches if you are going ahead and knitting 12? And then for the second turn, after you knit the 12 stitches, she has you knit back to where you joined, which again in her pattern is the top of the armhole marker, and then knit 5, which again you're not going to be in pattern, but if you knit to the first knit stitch and then you knit 5, you'll be in pattern. And then literally the rest of the short rows, you'll be in pattern if you do it that way. So I don't know if that's a mistake or there's something I'm not getting, but I just did it the way that made sense in my head. So I joined the yarn right before the 6 knit stitches. I did not slip anything, knit 12, knit back, and just did the short rows that way. And it looks great. I didn't have to worry about knitting not in pattern. I don't know what could possibly be better about knitting it out of pattern than just doing it this way. So yeah, I left detailed notes in my Ravelry, although I'm not the most, hopefully they're coherent, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if you knit this pattern, I would do it that way. I think it just is simpler and looks great. But everything else was done to pattern, including the sleeve length and the body length, which never happens to me. Usually I have to knit the sleeves sometimes even a little longer because I have like long arms. And usually I have to knit the body shorter because I've got a short torso and I like the bottom of sweaters or really any garment to come like to about my high hip because that's what works with like wearing jeans and stuff for me. But I just knitted exactly to pattern and like the exact amount of cable she said on the arms and the body. It worked out great. So in her sample, it doesn't look like it's meant to be cropped or anything. So I don't know if she's just short like me, but it worked out perfectly. Again, like I said, I knit everything on 5mm needles, but I did the ribbing in 4.5mm needles. It's all twisted rib, but the neckband I accidentally did in 4mm needles. I didn't notice till I was done, but it really didn't make a difference for me. I mean, it wasn't an issue. You do double knitting to like have that little fold line, which looks fine, but then she has you just, whenever you're sewing down, or not sewing, but knitting the rib stitch with the inside of the collar, she has you just bind off loosely, which I'm physically incapable of doing. So instead of doing that, I just did what I usually do on these kind of things, and I knit together the stitches and then did a surprisingly stretchy bind off, which is basically just where you yarn over in between every stitch that you knit two together, and then you slip the yarn over and the first stitch over the second stitch. And that worked out great because I knew I wasn't going to be able to bind off loosely. It's more of a fitted neck and I was not about to play around with that. So yeah, it works out great and it doesn't look any different. So I always recommend that if you don't think you can bind off loosely enough to make sure that the collar still has stretch. Another thing is that I personally am a big fan of tubular bind-offs. I love the way on regular rib that two rows of double knitting looks before you do the sewn bind-off. I love that. I know a lot of people don't like it. I'm into it. I think it looks really great and creates like a really nice round edge on ribbing. But on twisted ribbing, I feel like, in my opinion, you could just skip that. I also like stretch the sleeves out so they're slightly weirdly shaped right now. But it still creates like a bit of a rounded edge, but I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I feel like it creates kind of a visible line where you did the double knitting because you can see so much on the actual twisted knit stitches. So I just feel like it would look better if you just did a regular sewn bind off. That's just my opinion. I mean, it doesn't look like so bad, but if I did this again, I would just skip that part because it's more effort and I don't think it looks better than a regular sewn bind off would in the twisted rib. So there's that. So overall, I really like the result and the color. I'm sure I'll have shown you how it fits on me in, B-roll. It's beautiful to look at. I just wish I'd used a yarn that was not so itchy. But I've learned my lesson. You have to learn the lessons. So in the future, I won't use a yarn and I'll just have one slightly scratchy sweater. Again, if you want to buy the yarn, DM me. I'll give you a good price. The next finished or mostly finished object that I have for you today is, pull it out so it looks all nice, the winter clutch. The chain is so long, it's difficult for me to hold it up so you can see it. But yes, this is the winter clutch by Petite Knit. Isn't it beautiful? I love it. It's in this nice silver color that I am obsessed with. So again, I'll give you the basic information on the pattern. The gauge is 26 stitches by 46 rows, and sorry, the chain just makes a lot of noise. And that is in this garter slip stitch pattern. When I first saw this pattern, like photos of it, I honestly thought it was some kind of seed stitch looking type pattern, because you see like the bumps and everything, but it's actually all made up of garter stitch with these slip stitches that kind of like pulls some of the threads upward, and that's kind of what gives it the very even bumpy texture. You're basically just doing 2 rows of knits and purls because you're doing it in the round, so you do have to purl to create garter. And then you have one row where you knit one, slip one in some order. The next row you purl one, slip one in a different order, and then knit, and then go back to knitting and purling. She just mixes up the order in which you knit and slip the stitches. So it's an 8-row repeat, and every 4 rows you're doing something just slightly different. So it's very easy to remember and very easy to, well, it's not super easy to tell where you're at. You do have to use some brain power to like read your stitches and figure out which row you're on if you put it down and pick it back up and you're not like extremely detailed like I should be. This gets like very crumpled when I put it in my lap. I really want to add some interfacing to the bottom when I do sew the lining. That's another thing, I have not sewn the lining yet, so I guess you could call this a mostly finished object, but still. Who are you, the knitting police? She recommends a 3mm needle for this project. I only used why did I say only? I used a 4.5mm needle to get gauge here, so much higher. When I was looking through the pattern projects on Ravelry, it seemed like there was a lot of differing sizes that people use to get gauge, so I'm not sure if that just depends on the yarn chosen, but I did do a gauge swatch and I did meet gauge with 4.5mm needles, and again, I'm a tight knitter, but still, that's a lot of needle size to go up. She recommends a Danish yarn that she uses in a lot of her patterns. It's like Helholtz Uldspinderi, which is not available in America as far as I know, but I really wanted to use like a wool and a mohair held together, which really gives it this like fluffy, ethereal vintage look in my opinion. It looks great with the garter slip stitch because it kind of makes the stitch pattern like less harsh. The yarn she uses also seems very fluffy in the pattern, which is why I decided to use a mohair, but I don't know, that yarn just says it's 100% wool, so I'm not sure what gives it like that halo that it has. The yarn she uses, she recommends 100 grams or 301 yards. I'm not sure ball of fingering weight wool, but I did do a small gauge swatch, so I think if I hadn't done the gauge swatch or if I had just salvaged the yarn from the gauge swatch, I would have been able to use 1 ball of fingering weight wool and 1 ball of Knit Picks Aloft Kid Mohair. So yes, I used Knit Picks yarn for both of the yarns that I used in this project. For the fingering weight wool, I used Knit Picks Palette in the color silver, and I used Nitpick's mohair in the shade plover. And as I said this before, Nitpicks has the softest mohair that I've ever felt. I haven't used like Issachar, I've only used Knitting for Olive and Drops, so those are my only comparisons that I have for mohair. But out of those three, Nitpicks is the softest, but they have like the worst color selection. They have like a few colors, maybe 3 or so that I would use, but then the rest are like very bright rainbowy colors. So it's not the best selection for me, but it is very nice. So I'm hoping they release more subtle colors in the future. I did buy 2 balls of each because I just wasn't quite sure, but I have like a full ball of each left over, so I'm gonna end up finally knitting that pair of DK weight mohair socks that I've talked about, like my nice house socks. So I don't have a problem with it being left over. And again, I think if you make sure you have an entire ball, like you either don't knit a gauge watch or you salvage the yarn from that gauge watch, I think you'll be fine not using or not having to break into a second ball, and you could just get 1 ball of each. This would be a good project for like scraps if like you accidentally bought like a ball extra of wool and mohair for like a sweater. That would be a good idea. So when you do the pattern, you'll see in the pattern requirements that it requires these 2 different circular needles in whatever size you're using. I was curious why, and I didn't particularly want to buy another set of tips for my needles, so I figured I would try to do it without it. And once you read the pattern, you'll find that it's very easy to not have to use 2 separate tips or like 2 sets of tips or needles if you have an interchangeable knitting needle set. If you didn't, I'm sure you could make it work, maybe going a size down and just switching out the needles when you have to work the other sides. But if you have an interchangeable knitting needle set, it's very easy, and I'll tell you how. Basically, the reason she has you have 2 separate circular needles is because when you start the pattern, you cast on at the bottom here, and you'll see kind of a line where the cast on is. So you do a Judy's Magic cast on, and you're meant to have one side of the stitches on one needle and the other side on the other, and you put one on hold and you work each side at a time. So basically what I did was I had 2 separate cables, like interchangeable cables, and I put one of the tips on each cable, and I did the Judy's Magic cast on using both the tips, so they were on 2 separate cables. And then I just put both the tips on one needle, worked that side, put the tips on the other needle, worked that side, and then you only need 1 cable to work in the round. So yeah, if you have an interchangeable set, just letting you know you do not have to have 2 separate needles. Again, even if you have just 2 separate circular needles that are fixed, that are in a similar size, I'm sure you could just do the cast on and then use like a barber cord to switch out which cable you use for the other side. I don't think it's necessary to have to buy like a whole new set of needles for this one project, unless you have them and you don't want to fuss about it. But again, the way she sets up the magic cast on, you have this clear line down the middle, because where you cast on, you start working the pattern at the same exact place, but if you consider it as one whole, you don't end up in the same place as if you were knitting from one side to the other, like in the pattern. But I don't know, I feel like the line does help give it some structure, and I don't think it would mess up like the rest of the pattern when you join in the round. But I mean, it's at the bottom, so it's not the worst thing. You could figure out where to start the pattern so that it all lines up, but I don't think it's really that big of a deal. Pattern is very clear. Again, it's very simple, easier than it looks. The difficult part, kind of, is inserting the frame. So first of all, when you insert your frame, please make sure that you have checked which way you could have to fold the frame to make it work. So I don't know what I was thinking. I might have had some wine when I first tried to put the frame in. I ordered it off Amazon, came in sets of 2, thank God, because I put one in and I tried to close it and I was like, this is not working. I was like, it's stuck. And if you've ever done these frames, they're not the easiest to close just like by themselves, because there's not much grip you can get to like bend them in half. So I thought it was just like stuck, or like, I don't know, something was weird about it. So then I kept trying and I broke it. It was the wrong side. I was basically trying to bend where the joints did not allow for you to bend them. So that was embarrassing. That sucked. Thank God I had another frame. So just check. I didn't even check. I just put it in there and I was like, this will do. I don't know what was wrong with me. But once you actually have to sew in the frame, it's a little difficult, or more difficult than I expected it to be. So I just kind of thought, I wasn't really thinking it through. I thought I could put in the frame and just slowly start wrapping the stockinette edges over each part of the frame as I sewed it in. You can't do that. I mean, I guess you can, but it's not going to work very well, because when you're around the corners, like, things have to be kind of eased in. You've got to be very careful that you wrap the entire thing around the actual folds of the frame. So it's not so much straightforward as like, oh, you start in one place and you just wrap as you go. And also, you obviously want the corners to align with the points. So what I recommend doing, and this is what I did, is when you bind off the stockinette, take some pins, like some sewing pins or something, and insert the frame and start wrapping it before you sew it down. Just like basically try to get the entire thing wrapped in a way that looks good and pin everything down, and then start to sew it down, because it makes sure that everything is in place. And it's a lot harder to get everything in place than you might think. It like took a second, and I'd be really careful to wrap around the entire thing. So yeah, I would not, she doesn't give instructions really, she just says sew it down. I would not start wrapping and sewing until you are confident that you have something that you know is going to work. Again, I have not sewed my lining, but I have a lining. I have this silver viscose satin that I bought once for a top, like about like a yard of it, and I never used it, and it perfectly matches this silver color. So I'm going to use like that kind of satiny fabric as my lining. It's going to be really pretty, I think. And I also I'm planning on sewing interfacing again. I think I'm going to get some stiffer interfacing and cut out the bottom and tack it to the bottom before I put the fabric in, like just tack some to the yarn part of the bottom, and then do some lighter interfacing ironed onto the bottom of the fabric, and then sew the lining together and put it in, because I think it will look good if the bag has a little bit of structure. Now when you put anything in it, it's just going to kind of collapse at the bottom, and obviously it's not going to be like the most firm thing in the world, even with interfacing, but I think it'll just help give it some structure. So I plan on doing that. I won't obviously talk about the project more in the future, but when I do get the lining inserted, I'll show you guys that in future episodes so you can see what it looks like with the structure I added and everything. Last thing, get all your hardware off Amazon. Maybe if you're in Denmark or somewhere in Europe, it's easier, cheaper to order from Petite. For me, in America, it's so much easier to order off Amazon. It's so much quicker. I know when it's going to get here. And it was cheaper for me than like buying it from Petite's website. A lot of stuff is expensive off of her website. I mean, get the bag, girl, but for me, it's just not worth buying stuff from her website. So I'll put the links in my description where you can get the stuff I got. I just got the pack of frames, got the she recommends 7.5 inches for the frame. I think my frame was 7.3 inches, which is basically nothing, and it worked out just fine. It comes in packs of 2. And then I got the chain, which was like just a few dollars. I got a meter-long chain, and then I got these little rings, and I couldn't just buy them in like packs of 2. I had to buy them in like a big set, so I've got a bunch of them in a bunch of different sizes, but they're like insanely cheap. And then you don't even have to sew these on. You can tell I clipped them through the knit stitches, and then you clip the chain on. So it's very simple. All you have to do is sew the frame on, and then everything else is really easy. But that is my winter clutch, and that is everything that I have finished since my last podcast episode. So I mentioned earlier that I had a failed project that is not frogged yet, but is going to be. I only recently accepted that this was not going to work. Honestly, I kind of knew it from the beginning, and I should have trusted my intuition, but I really wanted to learn more about construction, so I figured even if it doesn't work, I can learn something, which I did. So there's that. So, it's inside out. It's kind of difficult to show this. This was basically a failed set-in sleeve sweater that I did. Not so much, it's not the worst fail in the world. I feel like I ended up doing a good job. I think the sleeves fit well. I constructed them well. I learned a lot about, the math of knitting patterns. But ultimately, in the end, it's just not what I wanted. I don't like the neckline. I wanted something a little wider, more of like a boat neck, and this is just not really what I expected. The sleeves fit well. I feel like there's a little too much room in the upper bust, so it kind of folds a little bit. And then the thing is, it folds like right in the middle where the neckline folds. I think it's just it doesn't fit well. That was kind of what I really wanted. What I wanted was a fitted sweater with like a boat neck or like a very simple neckline, and it's all stockinette. It's very fitted, and it has like this long ribbing going down the sleeves, like from the forearm down, and then long ribbing like on the waist, and I thought that would look really nice. I'd really like it, and I still really like the idea, but just the way I did it, It's just not what I wanted it to be, and I'm glad I stopped now before I knit the entire thing that I'm not gonna like the finished product of, but again, I learned a lot. I also made the stupidest mistake while I was doing this. I was so concerned about the sleeves. I mean, it's kind of like a set-in sleeve. After you work the neckline, short rows, you start increasing within the sleeve cap for a while to work on your sleeve cap. And then what I was supposed to do was when I got to a certain point, I was meant to start increasing for the sleeves and for the body. Like, obviously that's how that works, like a raglan. But I was so focused on the sleeves and getting the right stitch counts. I had to like undo them a couple times just to make sure I was getting what I wanted it to be, that I knit the entire yoke without ever increasing for the body. Yeah, that makes me sound very dumb, but I'm just gonna be straight up. That is what I did. And I got to the end of the yoke and I was like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. What was I thinking? So I had to undo it to like the point, because when you're doing, sleeves like that, you want to make sure that wherever you start increasing for the body, that you will get to the total number of body stitches and the total number of sleeve stitches at the same time as you get to your yoke depth, so everything is in harmony and works well. I did do that, and again, it's not the worst fit, like under the arms and around the bust. It's just not necessarily what I want it to be. I feel like I could do with like a tiny bit of positive ease. I'm not sure. I do want to like do this again in the future. Another thing is that I really didn't like this fabric. I think I'll show you the yarn I used. I don't have them like with labels right here, but I do have the balls themselves. They're attached to yarn, so they're gonna have the string coming from it. So I got these when I was in Dallas, and I am excited about these yarns. But this is fyberspates cumulus in the shade silver green. It's like this kind of like bluish gray. You heard me talk about this in my vlog, I'm sure, I think, or whatever episode recently where I talked about how the colors were not what I expected. And then this is derarumnatura albertine, which is a 90% which is a 90% wool, 10% silk yarn. It's very soft. It's very stretchy. Like, this was one of the only yarns where I noticed how much elasticity it had while I was knitting it. You could literally just stretch it out like a rubber band. It's so crazy. And this is a nice yarn too, although it's thicker than I wanted. I feel like it's thicker than like a normal light fingering that you might hold with a mohair. You definitely could get away with it if you were using a mohair, but this is a silk lace weight, so again, it's thicker. So the two combinations of thicker yarn make for not really a good DK weight fabric. I think you're definitely gonna have to go up in gauge to get a kind of nice, more relaxed fabric that you typically want with this kind of combination. It definitely softens up. Let me show you the swatch that I made. The reason I ended up going through with the fabric, even though I don't really like it when it's being worked, is my swatch turned out very nice. Like, it did relax, and it's denser, but it didn't feel like a super dense fabric. I still don't think it's a perfect fit, and just working on this the whole time, I was like really hoping the gauge swatch was right. But just having that like intense doubt and not liking the fabric while you're making it, I just feel like is not a recipe for success. And ultimately, I just feel like when I use this yarn combination, I need to go up in gauge, I need to experiment. I'm sure I can make this combination work, but probably just not with the gauge that I would expect to use this combination for, at least not for like this kind of pattern. I don't know. I am worried because I have another set, a fingering weight in the silk alpaca, but the fingering weight is a knitting for olive, so it's thinner, and I'm not sure. I wanted to use that for the Jenny jacket, and I feel like I swatched and it turned out fine, so we're gonna see. But for this, I got a 20 stitch gauge with this, and it's not my favorite. I definitely think maybe it'd be better at like a 18 stitch gauge or something. I don't know. I think I worked this in 4.5mm needles, so I would definitely be going up, maybe even to like 5.5. I don't know. It's a thicker yarn. Frogging this is going to suck, obviously, but in the past, I've frogged like mohair or alpaca and wool combinations by just hand rolling it in a ball by myself. You can do it as long as you're very mindful to maintain the tension as you're wrapping it that it's knitted with. So you don't want to pull it tight because then you're gonna have a different tension than you used when you were knitting. So the wool will probably be longer than the mohair. It's gonna be weird. When you pull it out of the ball, it's not going to stay in like one piece the way it would be when you're knitting it. So as long as you're very careful and you plan on using them as a combination, you can unravel them together and roll them into a ball. So that's probably what I'll end up doing, and hopefully I can find a good project for this yarn combination. But yeah, I spent like 2 weeks on it because I was busy with Christmas and stuff, so I wasn't working on it like constantly. And obviously when you're figuring it all out by yourself and you forget to increase the body stitches, there's a lot of unraveling and figuring. It's not so straightforward, it's just knitting from a pattern. So that did take up a lot of my knitting time. So I didn't get a finished object out of it, but I did learn a lot, and I think that's a good trade-off. I did want to give you a quick update on my melange sweater, which I honestly have not gotten a lot done. That's particularly interesting, but I just wanted to give a little update so you know I'm still working on it. This is the melange sweater by Petite knit. As you can tell, this is not my color, but it's from my husband, and it is a DK weight knit. It's using the Knitting for Olive merino and mohair held together. I'm using the shade Trenchcoat, which is this nice camely color that my husband loves. He's a soft autumn, so he loves all his browns and like soft greens, and this is gonna look great on him. I just don't love the color, so it's like not something I'm committing myself to knitting constantly, but I have gotten a lot more done to the body. I just want you to know I'm still working on this. I want to get it done eventually. It's what I use if I just need like a simple stockinette in the round, and I don't have like something else in the needles that is currently that. So it'll be a slower going project, but I will definitely get it done eventually. I knitted on 4mm needles, and the gauge is 20 stitches by 30 rows, which I think I had no problem getting. It might be a little smaller, I'm not sure. I think I'm knitting the size extra small for him. He's very skinny, so it should work out fine. Once my next whip is past like the setup stage, definitely want to force myself to get a little bit more work done on this. Just the color that kind of puts me off. Like, it doesn't inspire me, you know what I mean? So my next whip, I don't have a ton to show, but I really am excited about this project, and my yarn is kind of tangled. These two yarns that I'm holding together just always get tangled, and I don't know how to not get them tangled. They do. I don't know how I don't have this problem more often with like mohair and merino. Maybe it's just easier to tell which is which, but these two yarns are very similar. So this lovely little thing, this is the back. I'm working on shaping the neckline. This is the Conwy slipover by the Knit Purl Girl. Ever since I saw this pattern, I was in love with it. It's a funny thing because if I just saw the picture of this pattern that she has for the pattern, I don't think I would ever have chosen to knit this. I saw it on her in her podcast, and she was wearing it like a top, which is the look I'm going for. And it looked so good on her. It had that little fold in the armholes that my curvy top does, and I just feel like it looks so nice. It has just the perfect amount of ease for a top like that. And then I saw it on High Fiber Knits podcast, where she had the same idea. She knit it as a top, and it looked so good on her. And I was finally like, you know what, I'm doing it. I've had these 3 balls of Knitting for Olive merino in dusty aqua since like the summer. I think I bought them for a tank top, and I just didn't end up using them. I figured I would eventually, you know? So I had like a gift card to Knitting for Olive, and I've always wanted an excuse to try the compatible cashmere. By the way, look how tiny this is. It comes in these miniature balls. There's a joke to be made there. Anyway, it comes in these tiny little rolled up balls of cashmere. Quick side note, I would never use this again just because I haven't blocked it, so I don't know if it's gonna fluff up during blocking, but it really just doesn't feel like cashmere or anything special. I mean, it's a nice yarn. It just feels like a lace weight version of their merino. So, I mean, it makes a nice fabric because it just feels like the merino, but like a thicker fabric. But I don't see the point of paying the upcharge for it when it's just feels like a regular yarn. Maybe, like, again, when I block it, maybe it'll fluff up, but it has no halo or anything. At least not any more than the merino does. So I don't really see the point of paying extra for it. And the yardage is less than I realized. I think in my head, I was just thinking of the mohair. So I have less yardage than I planned for. And I'm hoping I have enough yardage to finish this project with just 3 balls of each. I know High Fiber Knits, she knit a bigger size than I'm knitting. I'm knitting size B, and she used 3 balls of each, the merino and the mohair. But again, I have less yardage with this cashmere. So theoretically we'll have to use more yarn, which I'm hoping I can get away with not doing that because I don't want to order another ball of this. But I'm really excited about this project, so if I have to order another ball, I have to order another ball. It's just an excuse to buy yarn from Knitting for Olive. But I don't want to do that because I'm weak and I'll end up getting something else, and I don't need to be doing that, and it's expensive. The basic pattern info is this is a DK weight knit. Again, she recommends a strand of fingering weight and lace weight held together. She uses 4mm needles, and Am I using those? No, I am. I'm actually using the millimeters recommended in the pattern for once. That never happens. The gauge is 22 stitches by 28 rows, so it's a lighter DK weight gauge, which is perfect. It creates really nice fabric. Honestly, it doesn't even feel like very thick like a DK weight. It feels kind of like a sport weight, like a very nice drapery, thin fabric that I really like. Especially with these two yarns held together. They're both lightweight yarns. She's got like 12 sizes in this pattern. It's a lot of sizes with very small windows, so you've got a lot of options to pick out your size. I have accidentally kind of combined two sizes. I'm going for size B. I definitely want it to be a little tighter because I want it to be like a top. I don't want to wear it over anything. So there's that, so I wanted less ease. The pattern is meant to have 6.5 to 8.5 inches of ease, so I definitely wanted to go lower there. And like I said earlier, my bust measurement is about 33.5 to 34, which is like right on the cusp of B and C. So I figured I'd go with B. And theoretically, I could get away with A if I wanted to, just be tighter. So when I started knitting it, I started with size B on the back here. Like basically how it's constructed, it's like a lot of tops are. You cast on for the back neck. Instead of doing short rows like some patterns would have you do, she has you do increases, and that creates this nice little 3-stitch or really 2-stitch line down the shoulders, and she has you kind of do the same thing for a little bit at the armholes, but it doesn't make as distinct of a pattern. And it's really cute, so you shape it with these increases for a while, and then I did that to pattern, like I did that for my size, but then she has you knit for a while, and she tells you to knit for a certain length, and I accidentally knit to size A, which is actually a little bit longer than size B, just because I don't know, I was watching the Mentalist, I was looking fast, it seemed right to me. So I knit to like 4 3/4 inches instead of 4.25 inches, I think. So then I ended up doing 2 less increases, like I did the size A increases for the armhole instead. So I have like basically 4 stitches less than size B, but 2 stitches more than size A, which really isn't that big of a deal, and everything else lines up, like the neckline lines up, and as I'm picking up for the shoulders, that's the same amount of stitches as size B. I think I'm just going to have to be careful of the length that I knit the front to, just to make sure they match. So I don't think it's a problem. I don't think that's going to be a big deal, but I didn't want to go back and frog when I felt like I could fix my mistake and make it work. Obviously, I can't speak much about the pattern so far because I just started. I picked up for each shoulder, you just do some increases, and then you work the other shoulder. I'm going to cast on for the front. I'm excited to get in the round where I'm working the little cable detail in the middle. I think that'll be a really fun, like slightly engaging project, but not too overwhelming, like it's still pretty simple. And I'm really excited to have this in my wardrobe. I love this color. It's gonna look great. That's another thing. I ordered obviously the cashmere much more recently than I ordered the dusky aqua. I have no idea if you'll be able to tell on camera, but these are like pretty distinctly different colors. They create this fabric that I definitely feel like looks more like the merino than the cashmere, but the merino is much bluer, and I'm not going to say cooler, but it's much bluer, and the cashmere leans much more green. But together, they don't seem marled or anything. If you look close, you can't tell that anything is a different color. It just looks like one color. But I thought that was interesting how different the dye lots were, ordered months apart and on different bases. And again, the cashmere, like the way it just feels like lace weight merino. If you've ever done like Cardiff cashmere, you felt one of those fluffy cashmeres, it feels nothing like that. It just feels like a normal lace weight yarn, like the merino. So I don't know. That's why I wouldn't use it again. Not that it's a bad yarn, just if I'm gonna be paying a premium for cashmere, I would just rather pay the premium for a really nice cashmere. Like for the price that I get knitting for olives for, I can get the same amount for Cardiff cashmere on my French website, so I would just rather do that. So those are all my whips. I don't think it'll take me too long to get the conwy slipover done. As for what I'm going to cast on next, I'm not quite sure. I'm supposed to do a knit along with my friends for the purl jacket, but I haven't ordered the yarn yet because I have a gift card to Wool & Company, which I was going to use for that, but I didn't order it in time, and we're meant to start casting it on soon. And I don't want to spend any extra money right now because we just had Christmas and I have so much yarn, so I want to use my stash but I'm not quite sure what I want to cast on next. I could do the Jenny Jacket V-neck. I have the yarn for the Eva cardigan, which I think I would really get a lot of use out of. I'm going to be knitting that in Drops Lima. So honestly, that might be my next cast on. I have the yarn for another Kirby top, and I would really like to make that in that purple color. Or I could figure out how to use this yarn that I was using for my boat neck sweater, and I could try to get gauge for the Chantal sweater, but now I'm kind of worried I won't. So I don't know. I've got a lot more yarn in my stash that I could make into something, but I'm not 100% confident what I want to do next, even though I have a cue that I should be following. I really want the Chantal sweater, but I just don't know if my yarn is going to work for that. I really gotta do a swatch. I also have the yarn for the cloud sweater, and I might do that. But also, if you remember watching my last video, I wasn't confident that I wanted to use the Drops Air for the cloud sweater. So a lot of stuff is just up in the air right now. I kind of want to do a smaller project. I might do my DK weight socks. I don't know. I'm just kind of a little lost right now after I finish my conwy slipover. Nothing is calling to me the way the conwy slipover did. So we'll see how I feel when I've got a little more of that project done. This is a new little segment I want to include. It's going to be a little different every episode just depending on what is going on, but I'm just calling the segment Lessons Learned. Obviously I talked a little bit about it previous in this episode, but here I want to be able to go a little more in depth about anything I've learned, whether that's like techniques or anything related to knitting or mistakes I've made and what they taught me. I just want a place where I could talk a little more in depth about that and not necessarily have to talk about like one project or anything, although I am going to be talking a lot about my failed boat neck sweater here. I wanted to learn a little more about what I learned trying to draft that sweater. I was not doing it to make a pattern or anything. I'm like passionate about being able to create my own designs, not necessarily for like selling patterns, but just so I can be more free and like create things that I really want. So I was following kind of the instructions from Barbara Walker's, I believe, Knitting from the Top, although her instructions are a lot vaguer, and I didn't have like full-on instructions for the boat neck, and I wasn't really sure. I was looking at like percentages. I think I heard someone say it was meant to be like 55 to 70% of your bust measurement, and so I think I used the lower percentage, and it didn't really work out. I definitely feel like my boat neck needs to be wider. And I think what I would do instead is just use my shoulder tip to shoulder tip measurement. It definitely needed to be a little deeper, and I think the fact that it wasn't a drapey fabric and it was too close fitting just kind of made this whole recipe for a boat neck that really wasn't a boat neck. It just didn't, I could get it to look kind of how I wanted in pictures, but it just wasn't what I wanted. I just definitely feel like I need to learn more about sweater design. There's so many like percentages, like the boat neck percentage, or tips for different necklines and shaping that I really want to learn. One thing I did learn is I feel like I understand short rows a lot better now. I mean, I understood short rows, but it's very clear to me how to do them. Like, you just take whatever length you have and whatever depth you want. So like for the back neck, I wanted to add an inch of depth, and then you can just calculate like your row gauge and your stitch gauge to just see how many rows you need to get down the middle to create an inch. So like I think my row gauge was like 8 stitches per inch, so I had to do small rows in the middle and slowly increase for the amount that I could get 8 rows. I think I might have divided the total stitch count by like 8 to see the easiest way of like the easiest amount of stitches I need to add on each row before I turned. And I think that was pretty simple for me. And I did the same on the front. I added like half an inch of depth on the front because I planned on adding an I-cord. And yeah, that worked out well. I felt like I really understand short rows now, and I know how to implement them where I want. I saw a Lily Kate France pattern once that did short rows and double knitting. And I remember I read the pattern. It was like one I owned. I wasn't currently knitting it. And I could not understand like the logic behind those short rows. Like, if I'm following the instructions, I could follow them, but if I was trying to understand them or write them down from memory how they make sense to me, I could not do it. And I still don't think I understand that. But I would like to go revisit that pattern now that I've got a better idea of how it works, and maybe knit like a swatch and just try to figure out how she does it. I just want to understand things better. I want things to make sense to me, so I'm not just following instructions like I understand the technique, or if I wanted to do something like that myself, I could, you know? So I'm slowly getting to that spot. I want to show you a book I just got that I'm hoping will help me a little more than knitting from the top. Knitting from the top is a great resource, but I am definitely a beginner in this, and I'm learning things. I want things to be more clear to me, so I'm hoping this book will do that, or help me with that at least. I got this for Christmas, and I was super excited about it. This is the Knitter's Handy Book of Top-Down Sweaters, and they've got a bunch of different type of sweaters. They've got seamless yoke sweaters, raglan sweaters, satin sleeve sweaters, saddle shoulder sweaters. Surprisingly, they don't have drop shoulder sweaters, but I do feel like that's kind of the easiest one. I definitely think I could recreate a drop shoulder sweater by myself. The other ones are a little more complex, and she's got like different projects. You can see them in manifested in different ways. So I really want to just read this entire thing and try to learn the basics, so I understand sweater construction. Fit is another thing I really want to understand. I'm starting to understand it better. I mean, you can have the basics like bust measurement, waist measurement, hip measurement, and ease. That's definitely there, but when I'm trying to design a pattern for myself, I notice all these little things like armhole depth or neck width or shoulder width, sleeve width, the way to decrease sleeves in a certain way so everything is fitted all the way. I mean, there's just a lot more to it than just bust, waist, and hips, I'm finding out. So I want to understand how to use all the different measurements, and even to know which measurement to use to get the right fit. So I have this book called Knitting for Your Best Fit, I believe, and I only have a PDF of it, but I definitely want to look through that. I think it's got a lot of patterns, and definitely I don't want to knit the patterns, I just want to read it like a technique book. So that was kind of a long rant, and I guess it was only halfway things that I learned, but it's definitely things that I plan on learning. And I definitely want to knit a basic sweater soon, just basically following these instructions, just so I can understand more about the different measurements and how to get a fit that I want, and how the stitch counts and measurements like intersect. I learn a lot from trying to figure it out all by myself, but I think maybe going along with some basic instructions might help me out a little more in figuring things out. So, odds and ends, I have no acquisitions other than the book and the cashmere. I technically got that since the last episode, and I don't have any plans to buy yarn for a bit. Again, I should be getting yarn for the purl jacket. I can't figure out if I want to do it in like a light gray or like a cool beige, and I believe it uses a DK weight and a mohair held together, but I'm buying yarn off Wool & Company. I have a gift card for $100. I want to keep it under $100. So I feel like if I use a DK and a mohair together, I might not be able to keep it under $100. So I'm thinking about just using a DK weight yarn. And I've been looking, and there are some options, but if you have any ideas of what yarn that I could get from Wool & Company to make the sweater, or which color you think I should use, I would love to hear it, because we were supposed to start it this Saturday, but I'm just not prepared, and I don't even know what yarn I want to get yet. So it's a struggle. Hopefully I get the Conwy slipover done soon. But I also want to say I plan on getting these podcasts themselves out more often, not just videos on my channel like I do the, monthly pattern releases and some other pattern roundups. I want to do podcasts more often. So I'm going to commit to having a podcast at least every 2 weeks. So like 2 weeks from whenever you're watching this, I'll have another one. And then I'll also still be doing my other videos that I do, because those are, still videos I really enjoy making. So if you are watching this podcast and maybe you haven't seen my other podcasts before, I would love for you to watch them, and I would love for you to stick with me and come and see me again when I come out with my next podcast. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to talk about in my podcast down below. Let me know how you think about my slightly different format today. And before you go, I'd love if you would like this video, comment down below your thoughts or what you're working on, and subscribe if you are not. It really helps me, and it helps me make sure that I can get this video out to people that are interested in my videos. So thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you guys again next time. Bye!